The Owl House, a show I have not mentioned in a while, but a show that is very interesting in how it depicts the relations between parents and children, and how parents should ideally act toward their children, how children should ideally see their parents, and how in the actual real world, when relations are not ideal, people should try to work together in service of a kind of mutual understanding. Now, the Owl House's sympathy is obviously with the child characters, in part because this is a show directed at a audience of primarily children and teenagers, and also because they are our point of view characters. They are the protagonists through which we see the show. If this show was told from the perspective of Camilla, Luce's mom, it would be a significantly different show. And in some ways, perhaps a more interesting one, I don't know. But the show is very interested at modeling different kinds of parent-child relationships, and it is remarkably consistent with its views on these relationships and its ideals of what they should be. A good place to start is the relationship between Luce and Camilla. And I am particularly focusing on how the Owl House thinks about the relationships between moms and their children. Particularly mothers and daughters, because that is particularly essential to the show, though there are father figures, both better and worse, throughout the show as well. Camilla is someone we first see in perhaps a more negative light than she deserves. We first see that Luce sees her as someone who is crushing her creativity, evinced by how Luce has to go to this rather lame and boring camp to learn how to do taxes and things like that, because she is too wild in her behavior. Luce objects to this, because she is the artsy, creative type, and she wants to be imaginative. And we are more willing to be on Luce's side. Number one, because she's our protagonist, but also because if you are watching a show like this, you are probably on the side of the artsy, creative outsider type. But a few things are worthy of note here. Number one, Luce's behavior is questionable. Like, some of the things she does are more or less fine, just kind of weird. But then there are other things she does that are actively antisocial, like sicking snakes on people, that should probably be addressed. And it is necessary to say that Luce does need to grow at the start of the show, and she does. She doesn't grow at this rather boring, bland place that would have just created resistance in her anyway. But when she goes to this magical world and realizes, oh wait, things are more complicated than I thought. It's not just, oh, magic is awesome, and I actually do have to learn to be responsible and think about other people. She does actually grow and mature as a human being. Also, it's important to note that Camilla does, in fact, deeply care about Luce. This becomes very, very clear as the show goes on. She has had a hard life, raising Luce as a single parent after the death of her husband, Luce's father. And it's hard for her. She has to work quite a lot and try to balance that with taking care of her daughter. And as much she is deeply affected by what other people are saying about Luce. They see Luce as a freak. They see Luce as this weirdo who can't fit into society, can't really operate in a normal setting, and Camilla is a deeply concerned mom who wants her daughter to be accepted and to succeed. That doesn't mean Camilla is perfect. She does push Luce away. She does hurt Luce in some ways. And Luce isn't always perfect to her either. She keeps a lot from her. She lies to her. She is so unwilling to declare the truth about herself that when this imposter comes in and claims to be Luce, Camilla can just accept it because she doesn't know what's happened to the real Luce. This is all kind of a problem. And what the Owl House, I think, is very good at is accepting human imperfection. Accepting the idea that, yes, people are flawed and broken, and that's okay. Nonetheless, they can come to understand each other a bit better. People are not these walking mounds of pathologies that need to be sorted out. It is inevitable that people are going to mess up because people are flawed and incomplete individuals. And yet, that doesn't mean they should be viewed as, like, cases that need to be solved. There's nothing wrong with them. They shouldn't be pathologized. It's just a matter of trying to work through the ordinary difficult problems of life. I think a lot about the ideas of the psychologist Alfred Adler. Adler is probably not as well thought of, not as commonly thought of as he should be. While so much of the basis of our psychology owes to Freud, certainly our conceptions of the unconscious owe a lot to Freud, and the basic image of what psychiatric therapeutic practice is. Adler marks a shift away from that into a more modern, more recognizably contemporary conception of psychology. One that is more positive. Not in a Pollyanna-ish sort of way, but in a way that acknowledges that people are not simply their problems. They're not simply these psychoses that they have that need to be solved. Adler was the promoter of individual psychology. Bit of an odd term because Adler was very receptive of how social environments very much shape people. He was not a hyper-individualist. He means individual in the sense of the whole individual. It's a more holistic idea of psychology that's about working through the ordinary problems of life and places more agency on the individual. And the Owl House very much follows in that lane. Just because the maternal relationship between Camilla and Luce is imperfect, that doesn't mean that Camilla is a horrible mother and that she needs to have a complete change of heart. It just means that she's an imperfect person who messes up. Luce is also an imperfect person who messes up. As much as we are close to her as, again, she's the protagonist of the show, and they gradually grow to better understand each other. We also have, in the opposite sense, the relationship between Amity and Odalia, her terrible mom. Odalia is not exactly the most three-dimensional, fleshed-out character, but that's fine. She doesn't need to be. Odalia, as a character, mostly exists, number one, to have a villain to have our heroes go against, and number two, to stand against the more positive images of parental figures we get in the show. Odalia is not just a terrible person, she is, but she is an inflexible person. And that's worth noting. She is someone who is never willing to accept fault, who's never willing to accept that maybe her ideas are wrong, maybe she was wrong about her daughter, and she should try to change. Instead, when Amity becomes more rebellious, she simply calcifies. She becomes more ardent in her dismissal of what she sees as Amity's willfulness, and tries harder and harder to make her conform to Odalia's ideal of what her daughter should be. This does not work, and it makes Amity more resentful, and it ultimately leads to the severing of that relationship between mother and daughter. I think it's pretty obvious that this is a much more negative portrayal of a mother-daughter relationship than what we see in Luce and Camilla, but more importantly is why. And the why has to come down to the inflexibility, the lack of give and take, the lack of this being an actual relationship that needs to be negotiated and thought about and considered. Luce and Camilla are flawed people. They are not these paragons of morality, but they ultimately become better by recognizing their own faults and opening up more to each other. Odalia is completely unwilling to do that with her daughter. She simply becomes more imperious and more haughty, and the result is that she loses her daughter. And then there is the relationship between Ida and Luce, which is another kind of mother-daughter relationship. Ida seems to be a kind of foil for Camilla at first. Ida is wild and anarchic. Camilla is restrained and deeply caring about safety. Ida is proudly unconventional. She's not married and does not seem to have a lot of prior romantic relationships of an extended sort, except with her relationship with Stan from Gravity Falls, it seems. But that's more of an Easter egg than anything else. And she is a very unsettled kind of person, whereas Camilla is more concerned with home, with safety, with the opinions of other people, for better or worse, for making Luce really grow into someone who can succeed in life. Luce, rebelling against Camilla, finds Ida much more initially appealing, but Luce initially has an oversimplistic perception of Ida. This duality is not as much of a duality as it seems. Both Ida and Camilla very much care about Luce. They are both deeply concerned for her well-being. They are also both imperfect people trying to grasp toward some semblance of clarity that seems hard to come by because life is hard. And the Owl House, again, in the Adlerian way, is very non-judgmental about ordinary human imperfections. Ida ultimately grows a bit more protective of Luce, a bit more concerned with her, and a bit less selfish. In the same way that Camilla grows a bit more willing to acknowledge Luce's independence and to try to not push her away as she did before. In a sense, these two come a bit closer to each other, not quite meeting in the middle, but edging a bit toward that middle. And Luce obviously does not see Ida in exactly the same way that she sees her own biological mother, but she eventually comes to have a warm but non-sentimental relationship with both of them in a more adult way, understanding that they do want what's best for her, even if they're not always right, and that they're flawed, imperfect people, and that while she shouldn't take everything they say as gospel, she shouldn't dismiss everything they say either. She should try to work with them, because they love her and she loves them. These are different models of maternal relationships in the Owl House, but they all manifest a lot of the show's same ideas, of the idea that people are imperfect and that's okay, of that necessity of open and honest communication to try to build these stronger human connections in an imperfect world, the necessity to be a bit more flexible, try to be a bit more open, try to be a bit less selfish. That doesn't make everything perfect, but it does make holding on to these important relationships a lot easier. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos just like this one before anyone else. Thank you all again for watching. Watch more of The Owl House. It's a great show. Adios, comrades.